You are now listening to the Building with AI Promises and Heartbreaks podcast, brought to you by Solid.
Welcome, everybody, to Building with AI Promises and Heartbreaks. Today, we have with us Miles Garvey. Miles is a modern data strategist with cross-sector experience spanning public institutions, consulting, and high-growth private companies. With a background rooted in analytics engineering and data infrastructure, he has helped organizations evolve from fragmented reporting cultures into insight-driven, self-service ecosystems. Miles brings a holistic understanding of how data works in the real world. He speaks frequently about the evolving role of analytics teams, the future of data ownership, and how organizations can adopt AI-native infrastructure. Most recently, in the private sector, he led analytics and data platform initiatives at G2, where he built scalable data pipelines, implemented semantic layers, and AI-integrated analytics, AI. Miles, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for being here. So we're going to talk today about how you built a data team for the AI era. So give us some background first, Miles.
Yeah, so a little bit about me. I have over a decade of data experience and led and built data teams from scratch. My most latest place of work was G2.com, in which we built out the infrastructure needed for data self-service across the organization. And then also with up-and-coming AI influence, how does that affect data teams? So that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about today.
Cool, great. I think you were there a few years ago, right? So you started there more or less what year, if you remember?
I started there 4 years ago. So
Okay.
I started as a lead and then kind of moved up the ranks and became a senior leader of analytics there.
Okay. And so when you started, what did the team look like, if you don't mind sharing?
When I started, the team was, 3 people, and then I built it up to 11.
Okay. And so when you were building the team, why? What were the priorities, the projects? What were the things that you guys were trying to solve for, which resulted in needing a bigger team?
I think with any organization, not just G2, but any organization, when you have a smaller team and you're trying to do self-service across the organization, it can get a bit convoluted. So what I call is the whack-a-mole problem. It's when you have tons of data requests come in and there's no real set models to draw from. There's no real self-service tooling, or the self-service tooling that's been built is very sporadic. So people are just kind of trying to get their data wherever they can. And if they have to bypass the data team, they will, because people do what's in their control first. So I would say in the beginning, for an organization, it is kind of haphazard where you're trying to reach out and do a bunch of things at once. So I would say that that's kind of the position where a smaller team would be in.
Okay. So initially, the team was smaller, 3 people, trying to respond to requests, but overwhelmed with requests, basically. And so business stakeholders would go and do whatever they could to try to get the data that they needed, the answers that they needed. So that was the sort of the starting point. What was the vision at that point? What did you imagine the future to be at that point?
Well, I mean, that's a red flag right there, is you should never have that occurrence. But, in the beginning and evolutionary stage of data teams, you start out as a central team, mainly to create your data infrastructure and set everything up for success. So it's almost imperative that organizations start out as centralized. But the vision is to first, if you're haphazardly trying to grab at data and write random SQL queries, and you have one business intelligence tool that's kind of haphazard all over the place, the main goal is to structure your data in an effective semantic layer. Semantic means meaning, so you have to set up a meaning layer that people can access when they want, rather than relying on a centralized data team for all of their requests. So the first line of defense is kind of setting up the structure of your data so that anyone in the organization can access it in a clean way. So part of that is building out what we call a semantic layer.
Okay. So the semantic layer, and we actually had another guest on the podcast recently called Ben, and we talked a bit about semantic layers. So anyone who's listening can also listen to that episode to talk, a bit of the background around semantic layers and also what they mean today. Interestingly, you were talking about a semantic layer around 2021, 2022, before ChatGPT came onto the stage and people were thinking about chat with your data. So the semantic layer back then in your mind was a lot around just organizing the data around meaning, around specific metrics, around specific business concepts, and then making that accessible. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah. So the semantic layer really started in the 90s, and it was made by this guy called Ralph Kimball. And it was actually a warehousing. So he wrote a book called The Data Warehouse Toolkit, and that was in 1996. And he formalized the idea that business concepts should be modeled once and reused across many things. So he built, he created the Kimball methodology, which is basically like the star schema, the galaxy schema, and the snowflake schema. Then in the 2000s, there was like tools like Cognos that comes out, and they're basically wrappers of the Kimball methodology and in metadata, and you'd be able to query that in translation engines. And then in 2010 around, that's when the rise of the cloud BI platforms and analytics became more self-service. So it was like Power BI, Looker, Tableau, so that's where the semantic layer was coupled to dashboards. And nowadays, in the 2020s, you have this concept of what we call a headless semantic layer. And a headless semantic layer is, instead of the traditional BI, which is like a linear path from the semantic layer to a business intelligence tool, a headless semantic is a semantic layer that's built outside of your business intelligence and outside sometimes of your warehouse, in what we call a transformation layer. And basically it exposes an API, and it's called headless because that exposed API can connect to many things downstream. So it could be a business intelligence tool, it could be a notebook, it could be the Gen AI application that you're trying to build, it could be a REST API, it could be reverse ETL back to, Salesforce or something like that. It could be a spreadsheet. So there's many things that the API can connect to. So we call that a headless semantic. So that's kind of like the timeline of business intelligence and semantic models.
Yep. So Ben last episode also talked about, and you kind of referred to it here, but basically the semantic layer was sort of built into the BI because the BIs needed it. And then there was this desire to maybe push the semantic layer downwards, closer to the cloud data warehouse. Today, you even see cloud data warehouses that have the semantic layer capabilities within. For example, Snowflake has semantic views, semantic models. So they're trying to push it further down towards them, which then enables that headless approach, to your point, right? Because then once you implement, let's say, semantic views in Snowflake, now your BI can query the semantic views. Your Gen AI can work with the semantic views. Your analysts can use the semantic views. So that's essentially what this headless semantic layer becomes. An interesting question for you is, you were talking about this at a point where Gen AI wasn't yet there, but semantic layers were already quite a thing. So was the thinking back then, at least initially, we want to build a semantic layer in order to standardize how people are working with the data? This is even before AI came into the picture from your use case perspective. Is that right to think about it that way?
Yeah. So the point of a semantic layer, or even a headless semantic layer, is you have a single source of truth. So it's kind of the portcullis around the castle. It's the last transformation layer of your warehouse, of your data. So that last and single source of truth exposes how you fit data together. So it also is consistent. So you describe your metrics once, and the same metric definitions you can label down into downstream applications. It's because it's the last layer, it promotes like collaboration and governance. So we think of like CI/CD, role-based access control, like lineage. It's flexible, so you can utilize it in different tools, maybe not in the past, but nowadays you can. And nowadays it's like considered AI ready when you build these models set for downstream consumption of Gen AI tools. But historically, yes, like it was built so that we can have some control over the data and still give it out as self-service, low code, no code.
Okay, so you built a semantic layer. What were the challenges in building it? What were the challenges in getting a semantic layer set up for the use cases we just talked about?
So if you're a business, the biggest challenges with the semantic layer is understanding the business context and translating that into these semantic dimensional models. A semantic layer is just housed of a bunch of dimensional models. Essentially, they're model files.
Mm-hmm.
And in each model file is like, product or marketing or sales model file. And they need to house some type of business context to them so that business users, when they use the model, A, they know how to use it, and B, it has everything that they need to make business decisions. So there's two thought processes of building out these models: a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach. So when your business isn't clearly defined, you would use a bottom-up approach. And when your business is defined, you would probably use a top-down approach. I'll explain what these two approaches are.
Yeah, please explain.
So a bottom-up approach is when the business isn't clearly defined and, even the stakeholders don't know kind of the metrics that they might be dealing with. They'll give you haphazard just answers to your questions on how to build the model. So what you want to do is you want to start building. So the bottom-up approach is build first, and as you're building, you work with the stakeholder to modify. So first it starts with the model building, which you're working with the stakeholder to get the initial business requirements. And then you release that model to them. You move it to production and they start working in that model, pulling self-service, and they're QAing the model essentially from their perspective. And they're saying, well, we don't have this field and this field lives in Salesforce. We need that in this model. Oh, it'd be cool if we could do this in this model. So there's a bunch of model additions that happen. And this happens for quite some time, but you give control of these models over to the business area so that they can actually write the documentation on the model, that they can actually work in the model and describe what their needs are. And then finally, once all the additions are there and, there's less QA and less additions, then you're moving to model optimization where, hey, the model might have gotten too big, or there's a lot of redundancies in the model. Like there's this metric called revenue, and then there's this other metric called revenue, and how do we deal with that? So removing redundancies and making the model optimized so that anyone can use it and it's easily translatable. And then finally is the streamlining. So a lot of the times with these models, you'll set up the queries or the tables that exist in these models, and a lot of people will write these complex queries inside their business intelligence tool. And once you have the model solidified through model optimization, then you want to take those complex queries that live in your model and move it into your warehouse into fact and dimensional tables. So this is where you can actually define your business from the bottom up to a solid reporting layer, we call it, or a reporting schema, or a golden schema in your warehouse. So that's called a bottom-up approach, where your business isn't clearly defined and you're building models to help you organize your business better.
So let me ask you a few questions on the bottoms up before the tops down. So first of all, who does this? So this was in the data team. Are there data engineers, data modelers, data architects, analysts, somebody else? Like who Who takes on the responsibility of, first of all, building those models?
So it depends on the data team. Like I've seen data teams where it's all data engineers.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen data teams where it's like you have one data engineer and like multiple data analysts.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, like model building and the responsibility of the semantic layer should be given to what we call analytics engineers. And these analytics engineers are kind of a hybrid between a data analyst and a data engineer. And they live in the semantic layer, gathering business requirements so that they can build out what's needed in these standardized models. But again, it really depends on your organization, where you're at, but it's all about evolving your people to fit certain roles that your business actually needs. So semantic layer is something I think all businesses generally would need. So more than likely, like it'll start out as data analysts and they'll evolve into analytics engineers. Or, data engineers, they're more set up for warehousing and like building pipelines. They're not necessarily set up for like gathering, talking to stakeholders every day and gathering, pulling data for them and that kind of thing. So I would say analytics engineers is the correct role to work in this stuff.
Okay. So essentially, analysts generally are slightly closer to the business because
Yeah.
of their role.
Yeah.
Data engineers are slightly away from the business because of their role, because they're, building the warehouse and the pipelines. Analytics engineers are sort of a good middle, which is a role that DBT kind of pushed very strongly, and now we talk about analytics engineers, a lot thanks to DBT. In that team that you built, did you find that you ended up hiring an analytics engineer and say, okay, your job is going to be to build these models in the semantic layer? That one of your existing people, you sort of moved into it? Like, how did that work? Maybe if you could share.
I think with data teams in general, if you have like a data team and it's mostly senior data analysts or, initially when we started building these models, I'll just put it this way. When we started building these models, they were learning how to build models. We were all building them together, essentially. So that's kind of like for step one, is get people starting to work in things and starting to understand how to do things. And then moving on and building that skill set closer and closer to what an analytics engineer skill set ideally would be.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you took a different route and went the data engineer route, they might be able to do it right away, but, they probably don't know the business as well as the data analysts. So gathering requirements to build these models will be a little more difficult for data engineers. So in the past, I've taken the approach of, hey, I'm going to train my team how to do this, and slowly but surely they'll evolve into this role. Because data analysts in general, their role over time is going to be more depleted. Generally because it's going to get easier and easier to get this information, but the foundations of this information need to be maintained and need to have governance, and data teams still need to have a little control over what's being created. So I think, if anything, a data analyst will still be a hybrid between business context and building, but they'll move gradually more into the building realm than they are, pulling random ad hoc SQL queries for people. That just won't need to occur in the future.
So if we tie this together, so basically data analysts who are closer to the business, their role around, data pulls and can you just run this? Can you just pull this for me? That stuff is going to become less and less common with the help of AI and other tools. And so their role evolves into defining the models that these tools, AI and other, are going to use to serve the customers. You think about, let's say, somebody in marketing. That person in marketing, instead of going to the data analyst, will go to some tool to pull their data. that tool will rely on the model that the analyst built, the same analyst that would have originally responded to the marketing person's question. Now this data analyst built a model, and that is what's serving them. And the data analyst is graduating towards that analytics engineer role because of all of this transition, right? So is that a fair way to sort of summarize that?
That's a fair way, and I'll take it one step even further just to confuse your audience. But after you've put everybody in the right seats, let's say, and everybody lives in these seats and they're doing really well, your semantic layer allows you to take your data teams and transform them one step further. And one step further would be what we call moving from centralized to more of a federated structure, where these data people actually attend and live on these other teams, but they're managed centrally. So that's when, once your semantic layer is built out, then it allows more governance associated to the semantic layer, which allows teams to have better control over their data flow process that aren't the data teams. And when that happens, then they're more ingrained in the data because each of them own their own model or own their own schema in the warehouse. And their responsibilities through role-based access control allow them to own this data flow process or start the process of owning that data flow. And these analytic engineers or these data engineers, they have just been working on anything, but now you can associate them to one model or one pipeline or, like one data flow process. So these analysts over here work on the sales data flow process. These analysts over here work on the marketing data flow process. So you're separating your data infrastructure into basically data flows that can be owned by the business areas. If that's not complicated enough. I don't know.
Yeah, it's sort of it's another step further. So essentially, you're saying, okay, initially there's the central data team. Central data team starts by building a practice, right? You say, okay, we need to build a semantic layer. We need to build the models. Let's train up the people who are closer to the business, the data analysts, but they're still on the data team at that point. Train them up so that they can build the models. Then they get really good. And then there's maybe even sort of a standard operating procedure or some kind of structure around how do we build models? And now they can start specializing. So, one data analyst that is now an analytics engineer specializes in sales data, Salesforce, etc. Another one specializes in customer success, Zendesk and Gainside and so forth. And so they specialize, they start moving closer to the business, they start understanding the business more, they maintain their ability to build models and know how to do it. And that's how, that's essentially that next step of evolution in that process. Right?
Yeah.
Did I? Okay.
Yeah,
so,
you did. And a little bit of that is like, what we call that is when businesses start taking control of their data flow process, you're moving closer and closer to a data mesh structure. And a data mesh structure is simply, it treats data as a product. So your business areas are now producing data products, and these data people are helping them do that. So they have full control over their data flow. And instead of the data people living, being managed centrally, now comes the question of, should the data people actually be managed and owned by those teams? So you start out centrally as an organization. You need to get your data and your infrastructure correct for data consumption over time, and including building a semantic layer. Then you do governance, where your people are owning your semantic layer. You have roles and responsibilities over it. People are in the right seats. People are trained appropriately. And then comes the question of, how far do we take this, and how far should these different teams, sales, marketing, product, own these data flow processes? So that's when you get so the evolutionary structure is centralized, federated, data mesh.
Okay, so now let me ask you a question. I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So AI is in the picture, text to SQL, chat with your data, hold your phone and Slack away with your data. That's like what everyone wants, CEOs, business leaders, etc. What happens if you try to do that without building everything you just talked about, without building the semantic layer, without building the organizational structure, without both the technological and organizational processes and methodologies around this? What happens if you just say, okay, I've got, let's say, Snowflake or Databricks or BigQuery or whatever warehouse. I've got that warehouse. I'll point my AI at it and, let's go and ask some questions to answer business. What happens if I do that before I did any of the work you just talked about, semantic modeling and so forth?
Well, there's some tools out there now that are interesting, but I think that it's going to be, even those tools that exist out there have a built-in semantic layer.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just provide you an example. Like, let's say you have a CRO and they go into your Gen AI application,
Mm-hmm.
and your Gen AI application is trying to consume metrics-based aggregation. And the CRO asks, what was revenue last quarter?
Mm-hmm.
And the Gen AI application says like 2,800,000, like that. And that CRO puts that in a slide deck to present to the board.
Mm-hmm.
And then the board said, that's incorrect. Where'd you get that number? So the CRO goes back to the data team and says, why is this incorrect? And then the data team just looks, at it and is like, well, I'm not sure. I think it doesn't know what the definition to use for revenue is when it's calculating that metric. Is it talking about gross, net, MRR? But the CRO doesn't care about that. But the CRO just prepared the slide deck
Mm-hmm.
using the incorrect revenue from last quarter. So I would say it's just highly risky. You can do it, but I would say if you don't have your data organized, you run the risk of presenting numbers that are just incorrect and people taking those numbers as verbatim because they don't know that that's incorrect. And if they find out that your AI, it's you can lose trust very easily, really, really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that, like, for unstructured text, if you're doing AI and you're utilizing unstructured text, that's fine. But if you're doing any like aggregations or metrics-based AI delivery, then you would need something there to allow for those metric-based results to be more accurate. And that's the only warning that I would say. So yeah, I would say that's my answer.
Okay, so what you're saying is, if you want to get fired, then don't use a semantic layer. No,
Yeah.
but so basically, what you're saying is, if I just point AI, Gen AI solutions at my data warehouse, they have a good chance of getting it wrong. That's why they have a semantic layer built in, but still, somebody needs to manage that semantic layer so that the AI ends up with the right answers and not the wrong answers, so that the CRO doesn't go to the board and give the wrong answers. So that's why you need to build everything we talked about, building the models bottom up or top
Yeah.
down, which we didn't cover yet, but you need to
Yeah.
build that.
Yeah. And a lot of tools now, like these new, we call them out of the box AI tools, and they sit on top of your semantic layer.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of tools are coming out like that. Like Gravity Orion is a tool that's very interesting, and that sits on top as an autonomous AI analyst on top of your semantic. Snowflake released their agent, so you
Mm-hmm.
can build semantic views in Snowflake, and then their Cortex analysts can go into those semantic views and pull out information through natural language. There's like Zenolytic. Zenolytic is kind of a cognitive layer that sits on top of your warehouse, but it creates its own kind of semantic layer. And you can also use your own semantic layer with Zenolytic as well. But it's also a natural language that utilizes the semantic. So all of these new AI tools are really focusing on sitting on top of that semantic for context and business metrics.
So then the next question might be, how long does it take to build that out? So, you had to build an org, you had to build the models. How long does it take to get the semantic layer that I can utilize with either my BI or my Gen AI or whatever use case? How much time? So if I'm a CEO, and the CDO is telling me this, how long is it going to take before I can see something?
I think it depends on I always focus on what models need to be built, because it's basically taking your entire organization as it stands and trying to translate it into model files.
Mm-hmm.
And really defining what's in these model files is probably the hardest part, because you want to get all the necessary components fit into these. That's why I call model building an evolutionary process, because you're either doing the bottom up or the top down approach. And it takes time to develop a good model, even with natural language. Like if you have an AI tool that sits on top of your warehouse, and you're trying to build a semantic layer from AI natural language, whatever that it spits out, you still have to check with the business
Mm-hmm.
to see if that actually makes sense for the business. So I describe building a semantic model as both an art and a science, because it's mixing business with data.
Mm-hmm.
It takes to build a model is really quick, but to test that model with your business, that takes time. And also, data adoption takes time. So you could build an amazing model, but if no one uses it,
Mm-hmm.
then it's really only good for the data teams, right? So you need adoption as well. So yeah, I would say it really depends on how long. But to build a model is fairly straightforward.
Okay, so putting the model together, like the YAML file or whatever it may be, that's straightforward. But working with the business team, getting their feedback, getting them to use it, that part of the art takes more time. What in your experience are, good things to think about in that interaction? So maybe tips for people who are listening, this is in my experience what I came across that are good things to do in that interaction between the model building and then in the business. And then maybe also what to avoid, lessons learned or things that you're like, oh, that didn't work. So what would you share?
Yeah. I would say making sure that the model that you built has an owner outside of data teams. That's number one, mainly because that owner will hopefully work and evangelize that model without you needing to push so hard. I think a lot of times in my career, you build things and then you try to sell that thing. A person has to see a sign 9 times before they buy. Of building models is building the model for purpose outside of data teams. So having those initial evangelists for your model is really, really important. I also see a lot of organizations that have a lot of models that no one uses.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes requests come in where they ask you to build a certain model around a certain subject, but it's only for one person, and that person just needed it to do one thing, and then they just disregarded that model forever.
So you
I would
put
say
all that effort and it was just for a one-off and then don't need it anymore.
yeah, exactly. So it's kind of make sure your models are purposeful towards your business, and then make sure that there's owners associated to all of your models that have more than just one time use case, or that model is being used for downstream things. Maybe it's not just for a BI tool, maybe it's for other downstream purposes. So that would be one piece of advice, is working with the business and understanding the business. Another piece of advice I would say is take your data people and have them join those ceremony meetings of other teams, even if those ceremony meetings have nothing to do with data. Just integrate them into those meetings so that they can start understanding that business area or that team a lot better. That's one of the best learnings that I took away. Also, that allows you to begin the process of structuring your teams where these models are associated to owners, and then also your team can be part of that federated structure where they're part of the ceremony meetings and they live on other teams, but they're managed centrally.
Mm-hmm.
Things that I don't recommend that you do, I would say don't try to do everything at once. I'm doing a talk in Vancouver in October, and it's all around not using AI. It's contradictory, but most organizations are not ready for that layer yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say get your ducks in a row, get your semantic layer built out, have business owners owning that semantic layer, structure your business so that your data infrastructure is ready for that next layer. Don't try to rush ahead and build AI, because what a lot of people do is that if they can't use a semantic layer API, they'll go and use an API against an OLTP.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of issues with that. So I would say that I would recommend like not rushing in, even though if there's tons of pressure from investors of like, we need to build these AI tools, we need to create efficiency. It's best to take your time, I'd say. But yeah.
So what you're saying is if you rush in, so you said most organizations are not yet ready for AI. If they rush in, bad things will happen in terms of the output, the trustworthiness of the output, to your point of it earlier. The right thing to do is invest into a semantic layer. You don't have to build all the models. You don't need to do everything in one go. And actually, that was one of your learnings. Don't do everything in one go. Make sure you have somebody on the business side that is your champion for every single model, is your participant there. Make sure it's more than one and that there's consistent use cases.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you mix those things together, you basically now have people who are more capable at building models, people who are capable at interacting with the business, people on the business side who understand the value of the models. They work together, they start building things, they iterate through it in that bottoms-up approach you described, and then they can slowly start layering AI in some places on some models as those models mature, essentially through the process that you mentioned. And then what happens organizationally is that the data team ends up starting to look a bit like the business in terms of people are sort of have affinity to specific use cases or departments. In that way, they continue to support that process. So don't jump into AI, do the work before, but also organizationally build it in the right way so that as you start enabling more and more use cases and more self-serve for these people, it is done in a reliable way and in a way that meets the business needs. So is that a fair summary of what
Yeah,
you said?
man, you're really good at this.
I listen. Listen. Some people tell me I don't listen, but I listen. Okay, Miles. So we spoke about the semantic layer and the importance of it to enable various use cases, including AI, and some learnings on what to do and not to do around building semantic layers. What are you up to these days, by the way? We didn't talk about that.
Yeah, right now I'm doing consultancy, so I'm just working for a couple clients in the States as well as one in here in Canada. And I also have like an email list that I have called brabble.io. So you can go to brabble.io and sign up for the email list. We have over 100 subscribers, and I just send out emails like tips and tricks on how to structure data teams, to how to set up an appropriate data infrastructure, and then and then I teach how to build stuff as well. So so if you want, you can go to that website and sign up for my email list. And I'm always open for one-on-one coffees with people over Zoom, or if you're ever in Vancouver, would love to grab a coffee with you. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm up to.
And Brabble is BRABBLE.io, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So, and you told me when we first met what Brabble means. Do you want to explain that one?
Brabble means to argue of matters of little importance, because I think there's just the reason why I came up with it is just there's so much talk about AI on LinkedIn, and we kind of get caught up in the storm where everything else in our lives kind of gets dissipated away, and we're worried about the news and we're worried about LinkedIn. But at the end of the day, all this talk about data, is less important in other aspects of our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like to Brabble.
Yeah, me too. I do too.
Cool. Okay, so we're close to the end of the episode. We're going to do a little thing we do with our guests. I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and actually 4. I'm going to do 4 this time. And I'm going to ask you and try to not think too much and just answer as much as you can.
Yeah.
Okay, so AI tool you can't live without.
AI tool that I can't live without. I'll say Claude.
Claude. Okay. Why?
It's just the one that I've chosen for so long, and I know it pretty well. I think I just got used to it, so I utilize the API and other stuff from it. So yeah, I like Claude.
An AI myth you'd bust in 1 sentence.
AI myth I'd bust in 1 sentence.
We asked the hard questions here.
Okay. You need it now.
Do you need it now? I like it. Do you
Yeah.
need it now? Like somebody comes and is like, I have this AI initiative. Do you need it now? Do you really?
Yeah.
I like it. Favorite book, podcast, or resource for builders, other than this podcast, of course.
To be honest, I'm just going to say Brabble.io.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not a podcast or anything, but it's an email.
It's a resource. Yeah, it's a good resource. As hard as this may be, one prediction for AI in the next 5 years.
I think I talked about this in one of my data talks, but the internet is obviously shifting. And, we heard the news about Cloudflare, blocking known suspected AI scrapers by default unless the site owner is like explicitly opt in. But over time, it's going to trigger a bunch of effects. People use AI applications now just to do their own search, but the leads that come from those, if somebody actually goes to those links, are easily converted more to valuable lead. But I think if LLM based search continues compounding, it could represent, almost 15% of search like queries globally. So I do worry that a lot of what people are building in these public websites, such as these AI engines that like they need to rush to AI, it doesn't make a lot of sense because it's just you go from one AI to the next AI to the next AI. So I don't see longevity in public facing websites for the future. But it could be, I could be wrong, but it seems that's kind of the way we're going. And the internet is kind of fighting back against these scrapers, but they need information. If things aren't as relevant or fresh anymore, I wonder over time if this roadblock continues where the internet is kind of fighting against these AI scrapers, if the AI scrapers will actually have relevant information that they can use, and maybe their relevant information might become less and less over time. So it's an interesting battle, but yeah, that's my little prediction.
That's a really interesting area.
Yeah.
What you're basically talking about is the LLMs scraped all these websites. Like Google's was crawling all these websites, which enabled the Google search. Then these LLMs scraped the websites, internalize the knowledge. Now you can get answers to things without even going to the websites.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're sending traffic there, sometimes not. But now over the recent months, essentially the websites are fighting back, to your point, and they're blocking the scrapers. Now there's even a new standard that was launched like last week, where a website can say, if you want to scrape me, you need to pay. So we'll see if that takes off. But what you're basically saying is there's a bit of a battle here. If the websites shut off access to the LLMs will become less up to date because they don't have access to the data. On the other hand, they're going to continue theirs. So where is this all going to sort of land out? Will be super interesting.
Yeah, it's either the AI will become less reliable over time, or the internet will be forced to change. Which no one really wants. I mean, I wonder if it's a good thing if the internet is forced to change, or if it's a detrimental thing.
Great question. I have a hike buddy. We go hiking with the dogs a lot, and this was one of our points of conversation last hike a couple of days ago. He said he predicts websites will change. So we're used to, like, let's say you want to know about the local farmers market. You're used to Googling and then going to the website. Now you're just asking your AI. So now do the farmers market owners, do they produce a different version of a website that feeds into the LLM so that the LLM produces the right results and promotes them? And over time, do you find yourself with not needing a graphical website anymore? It's just, some content that the LLM just siphons in and promotes your farmers market.
Yeah,
So it's an
it's
interesting point.
yeah, it's tough, and I think people do like the ability to explore as well. So, but yeah, I don't know. I'm keen to see the change over time to see what actually occurs. But yeah, that's my half and half prediction, I guess.
Yep. I gotta say, that's one of the things I like about this podcast is that you start with focusing on some area, a lot of times related to data, et cetera, and then you find yourself just, talking a bit more existentially a bit. I like that. Miles, I really, really appreciate you taking the time. So first of all, everyone remember bravo.io to find Miles. And of course, like and subscribe to the podcast, as they always say. The button is somewhere around me, depending on what platform you're on. Appreciate you being here, Miles. Appreciate everyone for listening, and see you at the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you. See you.